Hi, my name is Erica T. Worth, and I'm the author of White Horse that's out with Flatiron Macmillan November 1st, and it's an Indigenous literary horror novel. It's about Carrie, who despises her mother because she thinks she abandoned her when she was 2 days old. And she loves heavy metal and she loves horror. Those are the things she loves. But when her cousin Debbie gives her an old bracelet of her mother's, Carrie's like, yeah, thanks, and basically tosses it aside. And but when she touches it, her mother starts haunting her, the ghost of her mother, and this monster begins to invade her dreams. And so Carrie decides that she guesses she should find out what happened to her mother after all. And one of the bits of inspiration for this novel was had to do with my grandmother, as I had been told all of my life that my grandmother had suicided. But when a cop looked at the death certificate for my mother, he said to her that it sort of looked like it had been doctored, and the family came to wonder if her husband had murdered her. And so that controversy has never been resolved, and I think in some ways the tension between those two potential very, very different facts in some ways kind of like stayed inside my brain and erupted into this novel.
Hey, it's Well Red Beard. I appreciate you being here. I'm back full-time on my channel. I would love for you to come over and subscribe. Just search Well Red Beard on YouTube. I delve deep into horror. I've spent the last 3 years reading a ton of independent small press horror. There's treasure to be found there, and I go out there and find it for you. I'm not afraid to tell you the books that aren't great while telling you the books that are great. I don't break hearts or hurt feelings, but if a book doesn't work for me, I will tell you that, and I'll tell you why. I'm on a new mission now to go back and dig into some great horror from the 80s and 90s. I'm working my way through Robert McCammon's books. I'm going to look at all of Peter Straub's work. I'm going to do Brian Keene. I've got aspirations to go back and do J.F. Gonzalez, a lot of the greats, so you have a good idea of where to start. I have a video up for J.F. Gonzalez's Survivor, so you can see what all the fuss is about. I recently read Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, so you can see what all the fuss is about. I just want you to come over and subscribe. I'm trying to grow the thing. I appreciate you taking a look at it. This is Well Red Beard. I hope you're enjoying all your books as much as I am. If not, you're reading the wrong damn books.
Papa Joe has joined the building.
Yeah. He just texted me and told me he'd see me here, but
okay.
I figure I'll let him find out I'm here.
Yeah, I have a new background. Seedy Motel.
Oh yeah, you do.
Plus Jesus.
Yeah. Bates Motel over there.
Yeah, I can live like a bachelor.
The lighting in there is definitely like, you look like you're about to be murdered.
Man? Hold up.
I don't know.
Another light.
Hey, Dad.
What's that, Brennan?
Slightly better. Still kind of look like you're going to be murdered.
I can hear you on my headphones, but I can't hear it all that well.
We're gonna wait till we get about halfway through, and they're gonna be like, "Who's that behind you there, Patrick?"
Yeah.
Talking shit.
Yeah,
man.
I was.
You were, motherfucker.
I'm gonna wait till about halfway in, and then I'm gonna say, "Patrick, who's that behind you?"
Oh, God.
Sweet Jesus, he's got a hockey mask on.
It was weird because I walked into the room the first day and Catfish the Show was playing, so I don't know why the TV was on. What's up, Kasey?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey,
Pretty
Kasey.
good. Wow.
Did I kill it?
Yeah.
Did my arrival?
No. I can't believe everyone wasn't talking for a second.
Where are you? Like city-wise?
It's called Horsham, Pennsylvania.
Is it as like desolate as it sounds?
It's actually close to, I'm not kidding, a place called Lansdale, Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I've been
right.
through there, but I've never stopped there. Tim Truman and I went by it, actually, I think, one time.
I haven't been there since I claimed the land, so.
Copy invitation.
You're puzzled.
Okay.
Quit.
I just sent him the link. I sent him a link. So.
Oh, okay. Give me to it.
Oh my God.
I did just eat a bag of Cheetos.
I wouldn't tell her you had any snacks, or you won't have them long.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
my M&Ms will be guarded with my life.
That's not fair. She's in the best shape of all of us.
There he
just
is.
looking. I had like chili on my shirt.
I bet you do, Joe.
Joe, you throw me off with that red shirt.
Oh, wouldn't you?
I just
Hey, David.
Hey,
David.
Hey.
Yeah,
We
I
thought
didn't
we'd
get a
lost
link.
you.
I don't know why.
I
How
just
are
sent it to
you?
you because I couldn't find it either. Casey had to find it for me.
I'll tell you what I do. Okay, the minute somebody sends me a link, I save it to my calendar under the day, under notes, because I will
Is this
lose
a lesson?
and I will forget. This
But
is a
you're-
pro
this is a
tip.
lesson.
You're smarter than we are. Smarter than I am.
No, because I know that like 5 minutes before, I'm going to get a call from my dad saying I can't find the link. So I'm gonna cut to the chase. I'm ready.
And Keith was already here. He was.
Well, he's every
he
man
arrived
for
early.
himself.
Yeah, that's right.
Casey, you already said it last
What's
time.
your-
You are the one that leads the ducks.
It is
The
true.
baby ducks.
I am in
Leads
charge
the
of all
ducks.
the baby ducks, and I have
Like I said, I was just telling the story, David, about how your wife gave us some M&Ms and peanuts.
Yes.
And, I was all excited, and I looked over there, and she'd eaten both bags.
Yeah, you were at the house and you were heading off, and we just decided that you needed emergency rations.
Yes, we did.
forever grateful.
And Casey
Still
did.
remember it, right? You don't get enough to eat.
David, since you haven't been on, just going over this, they've heard it before, but if there's anything you don't want to talk about, no problem. We will note it now.
When we get finished with this, David will write you a note that says, please cut all the Lansdales.
Yeah. Please cut from beginning to end. Thank you.
That would be an exhaustive edit.
Do I look red to you? I can't figure out.
Yeah.
I'm looking up here, and you all look normal, and I look like I'm a lobster. I don't know.
Filter on my Zoom.
So if you can,
Filter.
I don't know. I need something. I don't
Can
know.
we get
I
one of
don't-
those?
You
Can we
need-
get a cat filter for David, or how's that work?
All right.
I guess you could say I look healthy. I don't know.
That's
You guys-
right.
You guys ready?
Look at me. I look pale. I'm always the pale guy.
You must be Irish.
Accurate.
All right. And welcome to Dead Headspace. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my host, Brendan LaFaros. Say hi, Brendan.
Hello, everybody.
And you can find us on YouTube for the video version. Audio version is wherever you listen to your podcast. Today, we're joined by David Morrell. He's most notoriously noted for his debut novel, First Blood, and also worth noting the nonfiction book that is right up there next to On Writing with Stephen King, the successful novelist. Say hello, David.
Hi, nice to see everybody.
You too.
I'm
And and Joe Lansdale joins us today. Say hi, Joe.
Hi, Joe.
You got me again, you bastard.
David knew that was coming.
I did.
We all knew
Yeah.
it was coming.
Keith Lansdale as well. He's here with his miraculous beard. Say hello, Keith.
Hello, and the beard says hello.
Oh, okay. And then Kasey Lansdale is also here. Say hello, Casey.
Hi, guys.
Also, Casey's beard.
There's Casey.
I
Who's she a beard of for?
oh,
That's not a
it's
shot at
already
anyone.
happening. This
What?
is like
Appropriate.
a microcosm of
got-
my life right here on this video.
we got a minute in.
Oh my God.
To be fair, I feel like I'm at the point where I can be like the unwanted brother, as I said before,
Fair.
to you and Keith. Hi, Joe, Daddy. Whoa, that's awkward. David. So a new kind of question that we don't really ask guests. We usually ask what got you into this or that, but I'm really, this ties into when we had the Lansdales on last time, which was you won a award for the HWA back in 1988. The title is slipping me, Brennan.
It's a novella called Oranges for Anguish, Blue for Insanity.
That's it. For the Lansdales, it was just announced recently that Karen finally has an award named after her, rightfully so, for, establishing the HWA, then called HOWL. So I'd like to know what your part or association with the HWA is, if at all, because I wasn't aware of that until I was looking around with Brennan.
I have two other Stokers for another novella and for a novel, Creepers. I was there a little later than Karen and Joe, and Dean Kuntz was extremely instrumental. And if memory serves, Harlan Ellison was involved at that time.
For the award itself.
Yeah. And and back then, if you were, as we all are, fans of horror and adjacent genres, where you went was to the World Fantasy Convention. And that, we had our own little mini convention at World Fantasy, and this would be the first one I went to. It was in 1979, and it's my understanding that conversations evolved from those meetings to say we should have our own organization, and HWA started. And at that point, in fact, there's one little wrinkle here, because you said it was called HOWL at one time. At one time, HWA stood for Horror Writers of America. And I remember being at the meeting, big meeting, where they were saying this is far too insular and we need to spread it. And so with a very easy adjustment, it became Horror Writers Association, using the same HWA. So there wasn't but it's, it was always a welcoming, very, very exciting get together. And I was happy. I can't say I was involved in the organization, but I sure, promoted as much as I could and got other writers to join it.
Yeah. No, one of the things that came along was when we were in the elevator with the McCammons, and I don't remember, it was a World Fantasy Convention, just like Dave was saying. We all went to those, and Rick and Sally were standing in front of us. We'd never met them, but I said something. He said, "Oh, I recognize that. That's Texas," because he was Southern, And so when we got off the elevator, we started talking, because we had all were reading each other's stuff as things then. And he said, "Yeah, I've been trying to put this organization together called HOWL, Horror Occult Writers League." But he said, I know I'm not going to do it because it's just so much work. And Karen popped up, which she might have regretted later, and said, "I'll do it." And then she started getting names at the conventions, And of course, we already knew a ton of people, and we're in communication with them, just because, we all wrote each other back then, which, wasn't on the email. It was actual.
It was physical letters.
Yeah, physical letters.
Tablet and the chisel, right? Is that the one?
Yes, the chisel, right.
In the Stone Age.
Yeah. Remember, I'm seeing you Thursdays.
Just making sure. Yeah, that's right.
But there was a big, it's hard to understand now at this moment in time, even though you guys are horror oriented, how much excitement there was about horror at that time.
Yes.
And Stephen King was the big push, but really it was around, certainly it's been around a long time, but at that point in time, there were these small magazines like Whispers and Weird Tales, and that had been revived. And there was like a couple of others along that line. They were all low underground sort of magazines, and they were publishing horror stories. And then when King made it I guess what you would call a commercial genre, because I think that's when it really became a commercial genre. I mean, you'd had The Exorcist, you'd had things by Hour 11 that were certainly horror, but there was no, what you would call a commercial genre. There were books that were sometimes horror, but when King came along, and that really got everybody excited, and a lot of people in science fiction especially bailed from science fiction and jumped into horror. And it's probably because there was suddenly, at least at that period in time, a lot of money in horror. And in fact, you had a lot of people that made a lot of money in horror for about 5 or 6 years and then just totally disappeared, never wrote another thing, or they wrote something else. So it was an amazing time. And so everything was just right when we stepped on that elevator.
And it's worth we should add our dear departed friend Peter Straub, who
Yes.
Peter came in after Steve, and was adding another element to it. Steve, Peter had a kind of an and I say this in the best way, an academic approach to horror. He was approaching it from a very literary. He was in the university world, and that helped add a dimension to it. And this went on. Another name that we should revere is Charlie Grant, Charles Grant, who did The Shadows, a series for Doubleday, a series of anthologies that were just wonderful, and he would go around the conventions at HWA and recruit people in effect to say, hey, do you want to write for this? Charlie doesn't get enough. He was never a big seller, but behind the scenes, he was a big promoter of the genre.
Right.
He was one of the bigger.
I think that was his most impressive thing, was the fact that he was an editor and a promoter, more even than his own work, because that's what a lot of people knew him as. And Doubleday was printing those books. And Pat Labruto, a guy that nobody thinks about as much as they should, was an editor over at Doubleday who first published me in hardback. I'd been published in paper, but he first published me in hardback. But he was also doing writers that, you say this, it sounds bad, but like Manly Wade Wellman, who were on the decline, at least as far as like being known and the fact of their age and what have you at that time. And he published them, and he published new writers. I think he published Charlie and all kinds of different people. And certainly he did Shadows with Charlie editing there. And so he's a guy that was a very important editor that nobody really seems to mention and should,
Pat Labruto.
Pat Labruto.
Yeah.
That's actually, I wasn't familiar with the name.
He's a good friend of mine. I mean, he and I are in contact all the time.
He did some really excellent anthologies as well, just as Charlie did. I was in a couple of them. I hadn't talked to Pat in years, but I really were in, these were very creative conversations, very exciting.
Yeah, it's different. And I just think about David talking about the Bram Stoker. He used to say, okay, we're both up for this award this time. And he said, I think you're going to win it, And he was right. I did.
You have all right. Now, there you go. I'm leaving now. You have a lot of Stokers. You've got too many.
A few.
And it should have
He
been
could build a
steered
house out of
them.
those houses. Let me see.
Yeah.
Speak,
I'm
David.
starting a small city. Yeah.
You mentioned anthologies, and actually, this is right up there for me. It's with you, Joe, Joyce Carol Oates, Clive Barker, Neil. For those that can't see it, I'm holding up "The King Is Dead," Tales of
Lou Reed's in there.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many wonderful names in here. But for those interested, that's actually where Bubba Hotep first showed up, his Joe short story. I want to, before we go elsewhere, since we didn't talk about it on air, I'd like to hear it for those that may not be aware of it or heard the last episode with you guys. We talked about Karen quite a bit. And then from that point to now, the award's named after her. I would like to hear you guys, what you think, like, what does that mean to your family that it's, that other people outside of your inner circle that a lot of people you don't even know. Kasey, go first.
Because I just want to say that, like, because of that it's something we've talked about internally and amongst people that we're close to, but that interview really is what kicked it in. And I think you being outside of our immediate circle, even though there was some awkward sibling and you called my dad daddy at the beginning. But other than that,
in a non-kinky way,
I like that you felt like you needed to make that point there, Patrick.
Joe's a handsome son of a bitch.
But now you're like, well, this could have gone either way. So let me clarify.
He said no in his eyes.
Somebody outside of our immediate circle and I think it sort of brought a moment of validation to all of us that we just thought, like, yeah, as a matter of fact, because it's one thing when we think, oh, our mom should be honored, the spouse should be honored. But when someone else is like, wait a minute, why hasn't she? Then it really put things into motion. And I was actually starting this whole written thing. I was going to do a petition, and then we mentioned it to a friend of ours, and the friend, bless her, Judy Pancos, she works fast, and she'd already written her chapter at the HWA, and she was already in touch with John, who is the president of the HWA. Yes.
Judy is also
go ahead, Keith.
I was just going to add some context for those that since y'all don't know Judy, but Judy is the one who originally did a song for my original Christmas with the Dead, and was also very instrumental in the biggest driving force behind the musical version of Christmas with the Dead.
Oh, okay.
And let me tell you, I'm going to say it every time it comes up. The musical version is the best version of it to ever exist.
It's better than my short story and better than Keith's screenplay.
I cannot wait for that to finally make the rounds, because it is the best version.
Right. And the point of it is that just because of that, that is sort of what kicked it into high gear. And I just want to say thank you to you guys, because you're saying that and your sort of support behind it. And you and I, Patrick, we had some dialogue after an email, kind of going back and crafting and putting it all together. It really, it was really appreciated. And then John Palisano, as Dad mentioned, very nice man, and he just moved so quickly, and it was very nice to see how there was no red tape. It was just like, oh, she did some work, she wasn't acknowledged, let's fix that. And then overnight said, we've changed the name of the award, we want to be sure that she gets that recognition. What do you think of this? So it was really great, and you guys were the impetus for that happening.
Absolutely.
Brandon and I would have
the funny thing is that go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Brandon and I would have never in a million years, even if we planned that's beyond anything that me and him ever would have dreamed of. So that, we love your family. So that
it was really nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the thing is people have known that for years. There'd even been articles about how she had found it and how she'd gone around and got all this stuff, but it's sort of like it bounced off because she's very modest. It's not her thing. But people like Harlan and Dean and Rick McCammon and Melissa Mia Hall, who's no longer with us, and all of these people at the beginning, but they all knew it. And everybody just thought, well, everybody knows Karen did that. And it just kind of went on and on. And she, I think she's just not that important to her to be recognized. But when she was, she really appreciated it.
Right. I mean, she got the Richard Award.
That's amazing.
10 years ago. So they did have a moment, but it just sort of was like a moment that, passed in the wind. So just you guys doing that sort of put a fire under everybody. So it was really nice to see. Really.
I remember when she got the Richard Langman Award, she came up, she pretty much said, thank you.
That was it?
About it. I think she said a little more, but it wasn't much more than that. It's maybe a sentence. That's how she is, that's it.
Keith, I actually have a good segue to something to David's the successful novelist with this specifically, but I don't want to cut you off if you have anything to say. If not, just give me a.
No, Kasey summed it up really well. There's nothing more that I can say than ditto for that one. So, we had no idea. Of course, it's the same exact as she was saying. We've been talking about it for years, and it's been talked about to the point where I was just like, I don't think anybody's ever going to take note. And it was wild to think that we went from the conversation to it was done in just a matter of days, probably weeks, but it was very quick.
Right. And Judy had a lot to do with that. So not to be, not to give her the mom treatment to really,
No. And no, absolutely. And Judy was definitely a big proponent as well, but either way, we really appreciate it. But I do think Kasey's right. It was because somebody other than us was starting to take note, and that's what we needed.
It blows my mind.
Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
I just gotta say, it blows my mind. And honestly, I'll strip away all my bullshit. It pisses me off. My Irish temper, it makes me so mad that someone that created this, that I guarantee a lot of new people, and that could go back 10 years or longer, don't even know who she is. And that's why it makes me mad that there's not even about how the HWA started page. It's mind-boggling. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, you know, it was supposed to have been changed way back when they gave the Richard Lehman Award. They were going to, and there were places where it talked about it, but for whatever reason, I think in the field, when you have people that are well known, it just kind of bounces off, you know, because they're more paying attention to the well known. And then Karen was the one that was working, behind the scenes and making it happen. And people like David being a member because, you know, bestseller and great writer. And you had, you know, all these other names that were there, like, you know, Peter. And at that time, I was a new writer at that time. But there were so many writers, I think, that Harlan and stood up and stepped up. Harlan actually knew the person who did the sculpting for the Bram Stoker Award, the little house, you know, and because originally there was just going to be some simple award. He said, why don't we do this right? And, you know, Harlan can always, he could always maybe go too far, but he was absolutely right this time. And I remember one time when we were in New York, these guys were there. David was there. I was there. We had a World Horror Convention. We were on a panel with Harlan, and we thought David might kill him.
I remember
You remember this?
I remember that very.
You remember that?
We all love Crazy Harlan.
I had never met Harlan before. This was my first time to ever meet him, and they had the entire row of writers up there. And I don't remember exactly how many, but it was like 8 writers. I mean, it was
quite a few.
Not the Harlan Ellison show, but that was not going to stop him. And he was about seated middle, and it was the introduction of the first writer, the second writer, the third writer, Dad, Harlan. And Harlan says, I'm only going to say one thing and I'm not going to say anything else. And then he talked for an hour. He did not let anybody else get a word in.
Well, but the corollary to that was I managed to squeeze in a little bit of time. And I still remember this. You guys made, I mean, these are those moments. And he was looking at me, and he said, "You're a windy bastard, aren't you?" In front of, and then he went back to do his routine.
I remember that.
Isn't that where I was there, and I don't know if I was a part of this. I think I was too young to remember. I think it was you, David, that I was chewing gum, and Harlan came over and was like, "Hey, women shouldn't be chewing gum," and David's like, this is Lansdale's daughter. She can chew gum if she wants.
That's right. And you still can.
I have no idea what's happening.
And there is.
That was my hero forever and ever.
That was right before, because I think Kasey was there chewing gum because she was there to get a picture with Harlan.
No, she was there to sign my book.
That's right.
Get my book signed.
There is that.
Because he and David were sitting by each other.
Where is that picture of Kasey and Harlan? And neither of them look happy to be there.
I'll never forget it. David was my hero. He's like, she can chew gum.
The world is full of Harlan Ellison stories, and you may remember that he is. Harlan had a run-in with Frank Sinatra that it's in a very famous essay called "Frank Sinatra Has a Cold" with Gay Talese. And Harlan showed up he was doing an interview, and Sinatra looks at him and goes over and insults the hell out of him because he's wearing cowboy boots. And there's no record that Harlan actually treated him, Frank, the way he treated the rest of us. I think he may have been quiet because Frank had his bodyguard there, but Frank,
actually,
Harlan was weird as hell.
The Gay Talese, what it is that Harlan actually, they were playing pool, and Sinatra's guy said, Frank wants to play pool, and he said, I don't care. I'm playing pool. And he had on those boots, and then Sinatra came in. He said, "You're supposed to wear a tie in here in the boots." And Harlan says, "No, I'm not going to do that. I don't care who you are." And there's a whole Gay Talese article that
then the fun starts.
By blow.
Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. It's called.
I gotta look that up.
And so Sinatra didn't do anything. And when Harlan got through, he left. I remember going upstairs at that same convention. I went into there having room parties. And I went in, and Harlan's stretched out on the bed, and everybody else is around, and they're all talking. And he went, Lansdale. He always talked like the penguin to me. I would get messages on my answering machine. I'd turn it on and go, Lansdale. But anyway, I went in and he said, yeah, you know what? I do that martial arts. I know I study with. I said, well, who? He said, Bruce Lee. I said, well, how come you didn't learn anything? And everybody in the whole room just went quiet. And then he went,
I guess it's good this media wasn't around when he was,
no, it wasn't.
It's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
So this is a great segue to say we're focusing on basically who came before us, who paved the way. And David, you talk about that quite a bit in The Successful Novelist, about specifically, know your shit.
Well, yes. And when it comes to horror, and this comes out of Stephen King's, we all call him Steve, but his name is Stephen King, Dance Macabre, his book about horror, nonfiction. And he talks about in the 50s how the Block and folks of that sort were established, Richard Matheson, were establishing a basis for horror, and then moving into the 60s and the early 70s. And Joe mentioned some of this, Ira Levin, Blatty, and then author that I'm very fond of, Thomas Tryon, and a book called Harvest Home. And Steve grouped those three together as another influential. And then, of course, he didn't mention himself in Dance Macabre, but you can sense that the torch was being passed. And I believe that authors should know the history of what they do. And I was once a Toastmaster at a Horror Writers Association conference. This was at the banquet. And I'd been at the bookstore, and they had several copies of Dracula for sale. And people were talking about Dracula only in terms of the movie. And I began to get a sense that folks hadn't read the basics. So I had a prepared speech that night, and I just didn't bother. I said, let's have a show of hands. And they were amazingly honest. How many of you have read Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is a wonderful novel? That's just, if I could say I'd written it, I wouldn't have to do anything else. and to their credit, about 2/3 of the audience at the banquet held up their hands to say they had not read Dracula. So then we got into, have you read Frankenstein? Have you read, and we go through, and it was, it was a good example, I thought, of how, we should feel obligated to know our roots in order to know what's been done and what hasn't been done in order to grow from it.
David,
you really nailed it there. And I have that trouble with a lot of people who don't feel like they need to read it, and they feel the old guy just crackles on about those old books. But I remember reading the Lair of the White Worm and the Jewel of the Seven Stars, all of those by Bram Stoker. Nowhere near as good as Dracula. But you always tried to read the classics, but I would also try to adventure into these other books that they wrote, at least one other, and try to see what was going on with it, and try to find out, why is this guy so impressive? What else did he do? Or why is this woman so impressive? What else did she do? And so on, And I still believe that that's one of the reasons that most people write shitty, frankly, is that they haven't read enough and they don't have enough prose inside their head to be able to turn their own prose, because you have to have that experience to write well. And I don't give a fuck what anybody says. That's just the law. That's the law.
Right. Well, tell us what you feel.
Yeah, David, I was hoping that story was going to end with you, Andy Kaufman, and then showing up and be like, "Who's read Dracula? Nobody? All right, chapter 1."
that would be cool. But Dracula is one of the really great novels. It's formally inventive. It has serious themes. And my God, that 50-page chase at the end. You can't equal it. And
you got Bowie knives and Texans.
Yeah.
Bowie knives and Texans, the thing about that novel too, when I read it and knowing when it was written, I said, damn, this guy was way ahead of his time. He had like whatever was the current technology of that time.
Yes.
Like those discs where they had,
dictaphones
where you could talk in, record things early on. That was in that book. Well, you look at it now, you go, well, that old stuff. But man, when he did that, nobody was doing that. And he would have segues where he would move off of a certain scene and move into no one was ever more inventive than that in a horror novel. I think that you see some of that with Ghost Story, and you see some of that with Steve's novels later on and some other people. But when you look at it and you think, wait a minute, when did this guy write this book?
And he was using he's got the telegraph, it's done wrong, but he's got blood transfusions.
Yeah.
He's got all kinds of, one I think talking about Steve King, he once did an introduction to some horror novels, which included Dracula. And he called Dracula an example of how modern science could defeat ancient superstition. And I thought that's pretty good.
Yeah. And you said
that's to that volume. Is that to the volume with also Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
David, you mentioned how if you wrote Dracula, that'd be kind of, there it is.
I would be happy.
Yeah. And I think it's funny because, you just posted about it today, that it's the 50th year for First Blood. And I mean, it's an international hit book and film wise, with two spinoffs of it. So I'm curious, you've probably got asked this a million times, so sorry, but I just got to ask, how's it feel? Like, how's it feel that was your first book that you had published? It doesn't happen.
It's very unreal. A few years ago, I was asked to do an introduction for Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby, the 50th anniversary.
Oh,
so, I mean, oh, wow. What a thing to be asked to do. So I wrote it. And as I'm writing it, I thought, God, this is really cool. I mean, Ira isn't here to enjoy it, but, 50 years and there's, the still in print and all that. And then this year I realized, well, wait a minute, I can say that about First Blood. And when I think about it, it took me 3 years to write it. And I was learning, and there were lots of, detours. And many times when I didn't feel that I would be able to finish it. And my agent, Henry Morrison at the time, because I was trying to find a new way to write action, none of this shot rang out stuff. And how could one do it as if it had never been written before? I mean, what a challenge. Yeah. And my agent said, there's so much action in this. I think we maybe get a paperback, but I think that'll be the end of it. And to our great surprise, in 6 weeks, it had sold to a hardback house. And then to a further great surprise, it was reviewed everywhere. We all know about first novels and how hard it is to get the attention. And Time, Newsweek, Life Magazine, Saturday Review, a lot of these places don't exist anymore. New York Times, Chicago Tribune, it was reviewed everywhere. And I mean, doesn't happen that way. So sometimes good stuff happens. And so it's obviously a kick. And I'm very aware of how lucky I was.
And couldn't have happened.
You weren't lucky. You worked hard on that novel.
Yeah.
I did work very hard on it. Yes.
Yeah.
That's why your face is after slaving on it for 3 years. Wait a minute.
Well, I didn't stop.
That's not lucky. That's bullshit.
That's the old saying.
Sometimes you have to be at the right time at the right place. Is an argument
that whole thing about luck happens to people that work hard.
Well, there's that. But imagine if it had been published in 1975, it wouldn't have happened. Right. The history, 72 was the sweet spot for that novel. And, so how, the fates or how the heck this happens, I don't know. But, somebody said, and this really jolted me. They said, if you look at novels that became movie characters in the 20th century, you have Tarzan, you have Sherlock Holmes, you have James Bond, you have Rambo, and you have Harry Potter.
Wow.
And that, I confess, I felt like somebody hit me on the side of the head. putting in that context. And again,
well, you reinvented the suspense novel of that era, the thriller, not the suspense novel. People have different terms, but I think the other thing is I think it's a literary novel. I think it's a novel that really has literary themes and deals with those. And I think that those people who think that literary novels shouldn't have action in them or shouldn't have, excitement in them are writing very boring novels. That doesn't mean they all have to have, shootouts or killings or whatever, but there's a momentum that has more to do with the way it's written than it actually does with what's happening in the book at times. And when I read that, I thought, it was lean, it was fast, and yet it developed those themes instantly. I mean, he's right there beside the road and we're in that, in the book, he's there, he is, and walking along. And then now we've got Rambo and when you read that, and David, bless his heart, he killed him off at the end.
I did.
And then had to come back and write another novel about him. And it was called Rambo, the Undead.
Well, the Undead. No, there's a slight story in that. The company that made the Rambo films, Carolco, had asked me that they'd read the contract, and in my contract for the movies, I have print control of the character. And so if they wanted a novelization, which in those days were popular publications, then they had to use me. And I had read the shooting script, and it was 85 pages perhaps, and it was very lean. There wasn't much to it. And I then asked, I said, I don't think there's anything here. What else have you got? And they said, well, there's this James Cameron script. And now at the time, nobody knew who James Cameron was, but I knew who James Cameron was. I said, what? He said, yeah, we didn't use it. I said, you own it? And he said, yeah, send it to me. So, so we have my name's on it. Sylvester Stallone's name is on it, and James Cameron is justifiably. And anyhow, so I said, all right, I do it because I saw an opportunity to expand on what to try to innovate what a novelization could be. So the point of the story is that I had a problem because I killed Rambo at the end of the novel, and I would not rewrite that ending. That's the way it has to be. So how the hell am I coming back with these novelizations?
Zombo.
And I was just so I was living in Iowa at the time taught at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, and another Iowa author, Max Allen Collins, was in town, and who's The Road to Perdition, Dick Tracy, a wonderful, wonderful writer and very collegial. So I said to him, Max, I don't know what I'm going to do. I think it'd be fun to do these, but hey, and he said, no problem at all, David. Just have a note at the beginning. It says, in my novel, First Blood, Rambo died. In the movies, he lives.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a great idea.
You were
problem solved. Yeah.
You were very fortunate when you started writing that novel because you had read the first one.
Yeah, I had a leg up on it. I had a leg up.
That's funny. Yeah. I mean, well, and what's funny is how easily people will go with it if it's well done. If the story.
And nobody, only every once in a while, somebody says, "What the." So I said, I blame it on Max. I said, Max convinced me to do it.
That's great.
David,
dimension, man.
You said that it's a good thing it didn't come out in 75. And maybe I read this in the nonfiction book, but I know that 73 was the last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but 73 was the last year that they had drafts for Vietnam. Came out in 72. So that's still at a pretty.
I was drafted.
You were drafted?
I was drafted, I think it was in 72, and I refused to go. And they told me I was going to prison, which I knew was going to happen. So I went home and got my stuff in order as they suggested. And they had a date for me to come back. I caught the bus. I did get a free sack lunch both times. So anyway, when I arrived, they said, because I'd already been over this, and I told them I'm not going. I said I'm not going to run either because I I'm not going to do that. I'm not leaving my country. I'm opposed to this war, and that's all there is to it. And they sent me and said, go see the psychiatrist. I was in there about 10 minutes. They sent me out and gave me a 1Y. And I went home. My number was 28. But I always felt like they threw me a bone. And it may have been because at that time they were already beginning to see that this was winding down. And I think the other thing is because I refused to be a conscientious objector in the classic sense, because they said, would you have fought in World War II? And I said, yes. I said, I would have, I might have fought in World War I, but I would not, from what I see now that this, I'm opposed to this war. And I was shocked. I mean, I went home with my sack lunch, just stunned, because when they told me to go home and get my stuff in order, I went and got both pairs of underwear and my socks I already had on. And so then I was ready to go back. And I went back and I told my mom and dad, I'll see you in 18 months, because that's what you did. You went in for 18 months. And I was very lucky it didn't happen.
That's great.
But I still, those are my convictions. I'm proud of them. The thing is, I dropped out of college to be drafted. My number was 28. I had a college deferment. I dropped out to be drafted. That I would not do again, because that was just young and stupid and idealistic in a dumb way.
Wow, I didn't know, and I learned a lot every time you guys are on. But
let me say something about David before you go any farther. Is that
I got 3 words in?
Yeah, got 3 words. No,
not easy.
When I first read, First Blood, it was a different way of doing a thriller. I don't know that if David invented that or not, but I kind of felt like he did. It wasn't that nobody had written a thriller before, but there was a certain approach to it, and not only in the style, but in the literary backbeat that the whole thing had, and the way the momentum was, and the fact that he wrote it in such a way where it didn't have the usual, the burly man walks down the road with his big rifle on his shoulder, on his massive shoulder, or stuff like that, which was kind of the thriller back then. And the other thing is that this when David was talking about novelizations, a lot of people don't remember this, but there was a period in time and that era when novelizations were thought of with some pride, and people did things like Taxi Driver, and that novelization is really good. And there's several other novels that were made from movies like I think American Gigolo was that way too, and there were several others like that, and they were doing it as an art. They weren't just doing it to fill a contract, looking at the script and adding 4 more words. It wasn't like that. They were really doing something unique, and sometimes they were very different than the script or the movie that was going to happen, And then later on, that disappeared and went back to just hacking them out. But there was a moment in time when that was kind of a new division.
And the fact that this book has gone on for 50 years in the way that it has is proof that what you were doing was different and page turning for people, because it wouldn't last if it didn't happen.
If we want to talk about, the forebearers, because we all learn from somebody else, there is a British suspense writer named Geoffrey Household. And that's spelled with a G, Geoffrey.
I knew that too.
And he had written,
good job.
He wrote a book called Rogue Male, Rogue, Male, Male, about a British big game hunter that stalks Hitler on the eve of the Second World War. And it was published in 1939. And it's a great idea, but what's even greater is that the book starts on the first pages, he gets caught. We never see the stalking. He's caught, and it's an escape novel. And I had a science fiction writer who was a teacher. Do you guys know the name William Tenn?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well, he was my teacher.
He wrote great science fiction.
Yes, exactly. And his real name was his civilian name was Philip Klass. And he was very kind to me at Penn State. And when he saw some of the stuff I was trying to do, he said, "You've been reading Jeffrey Household." And I didn't know who Jeffrey Household was. So he had me read Rogue Male and I think a better book, Watcher in the Shadows. But, you know, we're just like this, that they're both brilliant. And Household was a master of the chase novel, but he had this British kind of understatement to it. And one of the things I was thinking is, what if I took the beauty that was in Household, especially in the forest scenes where they're running through the forest all the time, and if I could change it so that I added the action that I wanted to put in. So the tail end of this story is when First Blood was done, I contacted Household. We exchanged letters for a time. And I contacted him and asked him if he'd read the book and give me a quote. So he said, send it. So I sent him the manuscript, and he sent me a kind British letter saying, "Oh, dear me, no, I can't possibly give you a quote for this book. There's too much blood in it." And, you know, I thought maybe the title is a clue. So you guys know Kim Newman? Newman?
Yeah, the science fiction writer.
Some years later, Rogue Male was the movie of Rogue Male, Manhunt. There are a couple of versions, but one's called Manhunt with Fritz Lang. And to pad it out, you know, to give the extras, that Kim Newman did a really interesting on-camera discussion about the novel. And I, you know, it's so ironic how life works out. So he's telling the viewer, and I'm watching this, and I just was curious what he'd say about the novel and about the movie. And Kim says, "Now, Jeffrey Household isn't read as much these days as he once was, but if you want to get an idea of what he's like, read David Morrell." And I thought,
okay, I really see that though. I see
Household would be turning in his grave, right? Because it wasn't for him.
Yeah, I see the connection with blood. What you just sort of have on your Jeffrey Household with blood. You know, I visited with Kim Newman once in London. I think we were. Yeah. It was in England anyway. I believe we were in London.
Who the hell have you hung out with, man?
What's that?
Who have you not hung? You've hung out with everyone.
Well, we meet everybody because we used to meet a lot more people. We go to these conventions. Everybody went. But anyway, he had a tea at his house, and it was very formal. You know, he was he dressed like almost Victorian.
Yes,
and he was a very interesting, very smart guy. And we come in, we're all having a little tea, and I'm going, "The hell, man!"
Covered in cookie crumbs. Tea down your front.
I was like,
"I'm sorry, I spilled tea on everything.
You got any milk with it? You got any milk and cookies? I want some milk and cookies." And he wrote Anno Dracula. If you want to read a kind of cool book, Anno Dracula is one of them. I also wrote an introduction to one of his books he did on Westerns.
You know what's interesting is Chuck Palahniuk actually did a foreword to the same book that you did, David, Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby. I don't know what edition that was, but that's pretty neat. Before we get off track, I just wanted to comment one more thing on First Blood, how I thought it was really cool how you have the Korean War vet who Joe and I briefly talked about Cho Sing Reservoir, but that bottom line is you got to be some kind of just beast after that. Like you've seen the worst of the worst, and you somehow survived frozen hell. And it's come down to him and one kid in another war that Korean war vets may have looked down on. I mean, Korean war vets, when they came back, most of them, no one really paid attention. And Vietnam war vets, they're getting the complete opposite treatment where they're spit on. But 72, that was pretty much at the height of it. So I found that to be really fascinating with the father-son sort of thing. And there's no end to this. I'm just trailing off. Brennan, you haven't talked yet. Why don't you jump in? I just want to say good job.
I am okay with that, because if somebody's tuning into an episode that has Kasey, Keith, Joe Lansdale, and David Morrell, they're not tuning in to hear my voice.
Or mine.
That's for sure. it certainly, you guys have no problem keeping the conversation going. But David, I think Joe made a great point earlier when he said that there is a literary bent to First Blood. And you mentioned earlier that Peter Straub kind of wrote from that place of academia. And with your background, I mean, do you feel like you do the same?
I do. I once met Oscar Peterson, the great jazz pianist. I love jazz of that era. And he, I was raised in a community, Kitchener-Waterloo in Southern Ontario, about an hour's drive from Toronto. And Peterson and his trio, Ed Thigpen and Ray Brown, played frequently in Toronto. So my soon-to-be wife and I would drive to Toronto and just listen to him all night. It was just wonderful. And he would walk around the audience and he'd talk. And I had a chance to meet him. And while I was talking to him, I realized how unique he was because he was classically trained. He could go into any concert hall and perform the great pieces. But he had chosen to turn his back on that, not entirely, but, for the improvisation of what jazz is. And so he talked to me briefly. I asked him about it and he talked to me briefly about it. And the idea that there can be a benefit it's like we were talking about knowing your origins, knowing the history of what you do, that you have a basis so that you know why you're doing what you're doing. And so I think, and anyway, we can't change what we are. And I, was in the university system for so long that I always think about it in terms of, ways of doing technique. And I did a book about John Barth, whom people don't talk about anymore, but in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and part of the 80s, he was a very big deal, writing what we call metafiction, which is sort of like what Quentin Tarantino does in films. It's like books about books.
And the goat boy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And I was impressed by what he said was that when he started each novel, he wrote about 20 pages in each possible viewpoint, and he calls these test borings. And I was talking to him one day. He was very good to me and allowed me to interview him. And so, graduate student that I was, I got immediately intellectual. And I said, I get it. The metaphor, it's like you're drilling into the ground. It's like going for oil and you come up and you got all these strata. And he looked at me like, what a fool. And he says, no, I do each of them to see which of them bores me.
I love that you brought up
anyhow, it's we are what we are, and in some ways, Peter and I often talked about this sort of thing. God, I miss him. I hadn't seen him in years, but he's such a loss to us. And I reread Ghost Story after his
great novel. Died. That's his best book.
And then he's using. One character is called Hawthorne, because he's drawing on Nathaniel Hawthorne, and he names some characters after famous authors in the horror genre, and
wrote in their style in those sections.
Yes,
he wrote in their style in those sections. Yeah.
And yes, exactly. And he, the Henry James a bit with the Turn of the Screw, and I mean, it's just talking about how horror can be literary, which isn't necessarily the only goal, right? But boy, he really knew how to do it. So anyway,
King sort of taught him how to amp it up. When he wrote Ghost Story, he did the literary stuff, but he also brought that pulp factor to it.
Yeah.
And he even talked about that, and how that it sort of influenced that work and made it bigger, because he did a really good novel I like to call Julia. And they filmed it with Mia Farrow, I think, if I remember right, because I remember seeing it. And then there was another one he did right after that, before Ghost Story, If You Could See Me Now. And those were really quiet, and they're good. But when he did Ghost Story, he took a lot of King's lessons and applied them to what he was already doing and kicked it all upstairs. It wasn't less literary. It was more so because he was willing to dance with the devil, and I think that was really, really cool stuff. I mean, I always loved university, but I never was able to afford to go, and by the way, just as a connection, my brother was a Vietnam vet, and he's a decorated Vietnam vet. We have totally different sides of the fence on that. We don't have the same, but we're very close. But nonetheless, it's just that, you read these things, and sometimes by having read other things, it gives them a greater echo when you read them,
Well, not really in this genre, but I just read Peter's daughter's book, This Time Tomorrow, and it's so fun. And I don't know what I was expecting, but obviously it was interesting enough that I bought the book. But it was fun to read this book where obviously it's fiction, but she's talking about the character's father, who is a science fiction writer, and she's talking about the conventions that they're going to, and she's basically telling this life story as this character. And there's so many things that are relatable, and talking about how she knows all these the guys that her dad's friends with in this book. And I of course know that this has got to be her lived experience, because it's very much my lived experience. And I just was so happy to, in a weird way, because of what happened with Peter, I wanted to have a different kind of connection. So I read that book, and it was just really fun. And I think it's sort of a testament of how all those genres can kind of cross over, and how she has a very literary type style, and you can definitely see the influence, but she's doing her own thing. And it's not really here nor there, but I just enjoy.
She's done very well. Her books are on the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, she's really carried on her father's legacy, and she's herself, of course. She's not imitating.
And it's nice.
It's really, go ahead.
No.
I'll jump in about Peter, if that's all right. I want to, before Joe beats me to it. I'm just bringing this up because I don't know if you know this, but David, we were actually lucky enough to have him on last year, and he's one of those types of people where you could talk to him. We just talked to him for like an hour and a half, had emails, but he leaves such an impression on you. It's not because it's not one of those situations where he's departed. It's just you guys all know him. He's just that type of person, and you can feel that in his writing too, where it's something different. Just to echo you earlier, it's a tremendous loss to not have him in this life anymore, because he was such a kind man too. That's really all I wanted to add to that.
Well, we've lost a bunch of great ones. I mean, Harlan's been a little while back, but Harlan, Andrew Vax, was a very, very close friend of our family. And and then of course Peter Straub, and there's others that I'm not thinking of right this minute, but it just seems like there has been a tremendous number of people dying, because it's that cycle. We're all getting older. Yeah,
it's scary. It's definitely scary to think about that. Brennan, I'm going down a morbid path, so can you save me?
It just got dark. Brennan, bring it up.
Apropos of nothing, I really like that you brought up Oscar Peterson. As you can tell from my background, I actually went to school for jazz bass, and Ray Brown, not only a fabulous player, but his method book is so standard, and as creative a force as he was, his method book just hammers you over the head with the basics, because you cannot move on to mastering this stuff unless you understand, what it's rooted in. And, we've talked a lot about kind of knowing your influences so that you can kind of build off that, so to speak. But I mean, even to the point of mastering, this little thing over here, Strunk and White, so that you can, grow to the level of a Cormac McCarthy and get rid of periods and, quotes and all that. But
no, don't get rid of periods.
I'm going to get a book. I'll be right back.
Okay. David's out. He's like, I've had enough.
No periods. Keep your periods. We're holding up quotation marks. Yeah.
Look at that. Dreyer's English. He is the head copy editor for Random House, Benjamin Dreyer, Dreyer. And this is the manual for copy editing. and it's the most wildly imaginative approach to teaching writing. I mean, one of the truly great idea. You would want it there next to Strunk and White's Elements of Style.
Wouldn't they fight? Never mind. I was talking about you were talking about jazz, and Kasey and I might be a little less sophisticated. We were in Ravello, Italy one time, and we were at I know you know where I'm going.
Sorry, Kasey, you made me laugh.
Herbie Hancock, and it was me and Kasey and Gore Vidal and whoever was with Gore Vidal. I can't remember. Wow. But anyway, we were all in a row because we were all, I was a guest. Me and Gore Vidal were the guest at something or another. And so anyway, we're there and we're watching it, and Herbie Hancock came out and they started playing around. And Kasey said, "This is just awful." And I said, "Well, they're just warming up." About an hour later, I said, she said, "I don't think they're warming up, Dad." And I said, "They're not." And when they stopped, we got out of there. And later we met with Vidal in a coffee shop. And I said, what did you think of that? He says, "Well, I think they got deep into something and got lost and couldn't find their way back." And I've never forgotten that.
It wasn't Hancock's normal music. He was doing.
I've heard some good stuff by it, but it was like,
it was an experience.
And I just, I'm not into that. And give me Elvis any day.
And I got to tell you, David, you definitely opened up my appreciation for Sinatra after our visit, and you had given me a book, and I always appreciated him, but I grew up with Dad sort of being the Dean Martin fanatic. Yeah. So that was more what I heard. So I was always better. Like,
yes, he is. Thank you. So I have his records, man. I'm not just saying that. I like him more too.
I wrote a long piece about Sinatra that it's an ebook called Sinatra, the Artist and His Music.
That's the one I read.
And that was included. It's an ebook, but in print, it's called Stars in My Eyes: My Love Affair with Books, Movies, and Music. And there's a long piece in there about Frank. And when Frank was he was taught by an opera singer from the Met. He at one point had a singing manual that was written by Frank Sinatra, and God bless him, I've forgotten the name of the the tenor who had been with the Met. And Frank, when he was singing these songs, he had to believe that they came out of his background, that he was, as it were, the creator. So he would take a pad and pencil and he would write down the lyrics and then throw the piece of paper away and write it down again and write it down again, as if it was like a diary of his, as if what he was describing was his own experience, so that when he would go in to deliver these songs, he a lot of, I love Ella Fitzgerald, but I never believed that Ella ever, paid attention to the lyrics of her songs. It was all the dynamics of the singing. But with Frank, with rare exceptions, you believed that he was singing to you. And then Mabel Mercer, and Billie Holiday, who were the female artists who taught him how to do this. Yeah, so
Billie Holiday, great.
I thank you. Yeah, Sinatra has it's a dated kind of music, but he has a lot to teach people, especially about using the microphone. As he said, now that Dorsey had his trombone, singers have their microphone, and you can use it. You don't have to belt out, you can bring it in, you don't have to strengthen. Or if you're going to breathe, have the courtesy to take the microphone away and then breathe and come back, which unfortunately most modern superstar singers sound like they need oxygen all the time. They just never learned to use the microphone, and nobody told them you're doing it wrong. So
Pete Hamel wrote a book.
You changed the way that I use the mic, and there's been a lot of time, really, because I've always been cognizant of it, but after reading that, and since that moment, I've had a lot of people that are in the know, if you will, compliment the mic usage. And to me, that's the biggest compliment of all, because I know that they're really watching what is happening. And there's such an art of, and live versus studio, this is a whole different conversation, but there is such an art of using this tool and finding, where to put it, where to aim it. It's so subtle that I was able to dive a lot deeper into because of that piece. So that was a real big moment.
That's very exciting to me. And you get rid of, by using the microphone properly, you get rid of the S sounds at the end of words, and you get rid of the popping P's and B's. Yep. Mm-hmm. And it just becomes so much smoother. But I'm a fan, and I have your CDs, and how much I admire your work. And I've seen you live as well, and it shows that you would, and if only more people would take the time to learn that art.
Well, it's definitely.
Did you ever read? I'm sorry. Did you ever read Pete Hamel's Why Sinatra Matters?
Oh yeah,
yeah. Well, I think he matters, but I think he matters, but I don't like him. That's all I can take. It's like you were talking about when somebody's singing to you and it's going past you. That's the way I am with Sinatra. I said, why is he just talking? This isn't interesting to me at all. And then once in a while, I'll hear
talking is the hardest thing to do. To be able to.
I know it, but it's hard for me to appreciate it. But I appreciate it in the bigger sense. I understand.
But I appreciated it more after David, because you start to realize like those little things that are. Because I don't think that his voice or his songs are as interesting as maybe some other artists, but I think his level of skill, when you really break down those kinds of things, is really hard to beat. And I've been able to appreciate it more and more. So
the interpretive ability, his voice, especially toward the end, got kind of crackly, but there are lots of other. Vic Damone had a better voice. All right, but Vic didn't, whatever with due respect. Vic didn't have whatever, and Frank, he could make you believe in the song, which is one of the hardest things for a vocalist to do.
Keith, jump in, man.
Oh, I'm just waiting. Though there was a reminder. And I'm trying to remember what his name is, because it was fantastic. As soon as I start to do this, you're going to watch Kasey and Dad. They're both going to have the reaction, because I'm going to remind them. What was that real tall redheaded guy's name that we were in Italy, and we went to see that show to get Tim?
Yeah.
What's Tim's last
name? Willis. Great guy, also a writer.
Yeah, also. So either way, what happened was we went to go listen to this musician, and it was one that was
jazz musician.
Yeah, and then after that was over, there was a guy who had like a washboard and a harmonica, and he was great. He was all over the place. It was just fantastic. It was just wonderful to watch. But then this other band came on, and it was just too loud. It was not doing anything it was supposed to do. You could just tell everybody was just having an awful time. And as time went on, we had a group of, I don't know, probably about 15 of us that we were running with at the time. And we were seeing, as time went on, there would be one more would peel off and another one would peel off. And, it was just kind of getting to the point. But so we got out there, and everybody was outside except for Tim Willis. And we were all just like, man, this must be his jam. He is still in there. It's been a while, and we were just kind of waiting on him. Finally, he strolls out. Now I understand he's like 7 foot tall, so he's just this big, giant, goofy dude just kind of walking out. And he finally gets out there, and I go, Tim, man, did you enjoy that? And he goes, and he started digging in his ear, took some cigarette paper that he had rolled up and jammed in his ears. He was like, what?
It was so great, and I think of that every time.
So when I think about people trying to appreciate bad music, Tim Willis, I've never been able to forget that moment, because he just came strolling out, just like, that man was going to be there for the whole show. By God, he paid for a ticket, and he was not leaving.
It was James Blood. You ever heard of the guy James Blood? I mean, his last name isn't Blood, but they call him Blood, and he's a guitar player. Anyway, that was him.
Great
when they were
blues
doing
musician's last name.
He was great.
Yeah, he's blues and jazz.
Yeah, he was great. He was great, but no, the other, I don't remember who it was that came on after.
No, that's who it was. It was Blood. That guy
I thought, what was the name of the guy? Because you actually had a run in with this guy later, the guy that had the washboard and the harmonica. You somehow
that was Pablo Leone, I think, the Italian performer.
Could have been. I don't know. Dad ran into him in like Louisiana a week later, weirdly enough.
Right.
So
Kevin, that's Kevin. It was Kevin. You know, when you and I ran into him at BoucherCon, we walked by and he was playing in one of the little bars.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
It's not Kevin. It's
you're
the guy
Andy Forrest, but Andy Forrest was great.
Andy Forrest.
Andy Forrest was great. Right. That's the one that was great.
Okay. Sorry, guys, we've gone off on a Lansdale tangent, and
we're all interesting.
We're gonna get there. But either way, I don't remember who it was. It was bad. But Dad says it was whatever Blood or whatever.
I don't remember who was bad. I just remember.
I just remember Tim. Tim just killed me, and I'll never. Every time I ever think of somebody having to listen to bad music, Tim will forever be my thought.
That was great. Hey, I appreciate that.
I'm still stuck 5 minutes ago. Keith, your hair's too long to ever say that a band was playing too loud.
Is that what it is? I don't get to have volume control.
Our cousin Jimmy Lansdale, my double first cousin, is one of those guys that
Can you make us sound a little bit more redneck.
Jimmy Bob Lansdale.
He's one of those guys that believes in Bigfoot and hunts him and all that stuff.
He doesn't just believe in him. He's got a lot more than just believing in him.
Kasey, I'm gonna need that Lansdale photo coffee table book right now.
But what he was saying, he said he saw Keith's picture and he said, I can't even grow a beard, and I can't either. It just doesn't happen. And Keith, how did that happen? You know,
I couldn't grow a beard until a few years ago. That's the really weird thing.
Like, you got a mustache, man. You got a beard.
I've always been somebody who, like, I could go months without shaving, and I would always look like I had that 5 o'clock shadow, and I had the chocolate milk mustache. And then
that's when I grew my first mustache.
There's pictures of me that I burn upon seeing every time, and it's the chocolate milk mustache because I tried to grow one once and it was just horrible. But I don't know. Just there was like a week went by where I was too busy to shave, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna try it for a while, see what I'm doing with it." So.
Patrick, when did you lose control of the interview?
Let's see. When I first tweeted at your father, let me
come back to something that you started earlier with David's book. One time, David and I were talking about this, and his book was
he's supposed to be like the main guest.
Yeah, but I gave him a quote for this book. But we were talking, and in the book, he talks about not writing in first person. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it's my most controversial. I don't say not to do it, but you have to have a good reason for it. The problem with first person, one problem is that people tend to use only details of sight when they write in first person, and so if you can know there's a lot of issues with first person, and that's one of them. And if you're aware of the danger, then you can moderate against it. The problem is that, I don't say don't do it because a lot of my household wrote in the first person. Henry James is, Turn of the Screw is first person. There's a lot of great ones. But anyhow, yes, you did give me a quote for the successful novelist. I was going to say that earlier.
Yeah, but I was telling him that first person, I would say, you got The Great Gatsby, you got The Sun Off. And all of my novels are in first person except maybe 4. I think all of mine are.
I think Dave's been trying to tell you something. And
that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Can you give a quote for this?
Yeah. And how did you choose that shit?
Well, David, also really cool for the audio book. You have the same guy, Patrick Lawler, that did the Blue Rose trilogy for Peter Straub, who also no news to you, but Peter supplied a blurb for that book, which is was that kind of like a stellar moment for you too, to just an author that you appreciate that you couldn't think higher of, and not to kind of like throw shade your way, Joe, but was that kind of like a really cool moment for you?
So I'm not. Is that I can't? Is that to Joe or to me that you're?
Oh, that was to you, David, for the successful novelist.
You mean about the successful? Dean Kuntz was very kind to me as well, and Lawrence Block was also contributed, and it's very. It's for the sense of the collegiality that we have. That isn't always the case in some groups of authors, but that my experience in certainly in horror and related genres, that people are always willing to pitch in and help one another.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know what? I will say, just because you brought him up, Larry Block, he actually, I think, helped to sort of pivot a small trajectory of people asking me to do things without asking.
Oh, really?
Asking Dad and I to do something. We were in line and I had some of his books and Dad had some books, and Dad's, hopping like a little kid because he's about to get Larry to sign these books. And so, but he had too many.
And I know Larry.
I know, but you're still excited. And so we go up and Dad is talking to Larry for a minute, and then Dad walks off, and then I'm there and I'm like, he had too many books. So can you get these? Can you sign these as well? And he starts talking to me, and he bought one of my stories for his latest collection.
Oh, are you in the game anthology?
No, it's collectibles. It came out during pandemic.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And
congrats.
Thanks. Yeah, well, and I already wish I could rewrite that story, because now I'm already like, what have I done?
Welcome to the club. And everything I've ever done, I wished I could do again. So,
but
I'd like another crack at everything.
I mean, that means you're doing good though,
because we're growing.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you look up years later and you'd write it the exact same, then you haven't changed as a writer at all. And I think that's part of the journey of being one, is being better every time you sit down.
Well, I hope so. But
you should really always want to rewrite your work.
He took a little gamble, and it was so nice. And the other side of it too is, and Keith, I'm sure you've experienced, and we've talked about this before, is just the writing process. It's something that we've been doing off and on our whole lives, but I think only recently something that we've leaned hard into. And I think pandemic for me had a lot to do with that, because I couldn't live performance. So I thought, okay, what do I do? And I've really done a lot of artist development in the last few years. Whereas I think a lot of times people sort of have this expectation, because we grew up in a literary household, that there's no artist development needed. And it's just like anybody, you keep honing the craft, you keep hopefully getting better, and you keep learning from what you're doing. So like you're saying, hopefully every time you sit down, you're doing a better novel. And the only one of us that can say they shouldn't change anything they did is David.
Oh no,
it worked. The system worked.
Nailed it.
My main instructors were other books. I didn't have college, and I think too, when you don't have that kind of education, if you want it, you go out and you just get as much of it as you can. So I have a more random education. And I think the bad thing about planning your own education is you leave out the stuff you maybe ought to know, but you just don't want to do. And that's kind of the drawback. But all of my stuff I learned by doing it. I never met another writer or an agent or producer until I'd been writing for years. I didn't know what that was like, and I just had to learn on instinct and reading other people and reading David. When I read First Blood, that taught me a lot. And James Cain and Chandler and Bradbury and Matheson and Robert Bloch, many people that I got to know later, which is even very impressive to me, because when you grow up, these guys are your guys. And when you get to meet them, it's like, oh my God, these are my guys. And some of them have become good friends. And then once in a while I'll look and I'll go, wait a minute, that's David Morrell. He wrote that book that changed things for me. I thought, he's like a big dog. He's like a grown up.
Joe, how did it feel the first time you met David? Sorry. How was it? Do you remember? Were you nervous?
No, to me?
Yeah, Joe, yeah. How was it the first time you met David?
It was a World Fantasy Convention, I think.
Yeah.
I think. And we actually gravitated to each other.
One of the best conversations we had, this would be really early, I think 81, 82, 83. You were doing an anthology with Karen. And you asked me if I would do a story for you. And we were, that's in some ways where we bonded. but you know, that we were kicking the story back and forth. And I remember talking to Karen, who I had a police officer in it, and Karen had been a dispatcher, as I recall, for the police department. So she was, you know, giving me some of the language that I hadn't gotten quite correct. And I think that's where we started our conversations, and then just continued.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
and
knowing Kasey forever.
Yeah, it's real nice. You know, you've always been somebody who sort of walked that line of treating me. I don't know how much time you've seen Keith, but you always had that thing of treating me as an adult, and also treating me as someone to reveal things to. And it always felt really nice, because it was always like, oh, is David going to be there? Because he's so funny.
We always had good conversations. Yeah.
I always appreciated that about you. I still appreciate that about you. And of course, Donna, you know, she gives me snacks. So, you know, there's Donna. And then
I'm really just in it for the snacks. And I was thinking about it when David said
not if Kasey's around.
Married, they were traveling. You remember you said you were traveling with your wife before she was your wife, and y'all were going somewhere. And I was thinking, did she pack him peanuts and M&Ms? Did he get peanuts and M&Ms?
No, what we had, you're bringing back a moment, because I had a car that I paid $100 for, and there wasn't any floor to the car. It had rusted out underneath. So I had one of those. I remember it was wintertime.
Flintstone car, I believe.
I
told you, y'all thought I was joking about those tablets.
Yeah, no, I mean, finally the police pulled me over and took the car away. But then that was what it was like to go to Toronto with my dear wife, who put up with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, mine did too. I had like an old Ford that, you know, it smoked like you had to stop, put 2 cans of oil in.
I did that. When you got the gasoline and then you put the oil in it. Yeah.
I had a car with the floorboard out, and we'd drive at night, and I'd get kind of tired. My foot would slip through that hole, you know, and I just enough where I'd go, damn, if I'd hit the floor down there or go through it, I'd break my leg, pull it off, you know. And it was an old station wagon that I had for a while, but it rusted out in the bottom. And if I'd paid $100 for it, I'd have paid 50 too much.
David, I have a question for you. I don't know if we're wrapping it up. I can never guess for the Lansdales and specifically, but because we have done outros where it was like 15 or 20 minutes long. But
if we start now to close, we'll be done in a half hour.
All right, let's pretend this is the outro. So, David, I do really want to know, though, if you could, for anyone listening, any writers, what's something that you would kind of impart on them? I know you talk all about it in your book that we've mentioned quite a few times, The Successful Novelist, but is there any 1 or 2 things that you would want to touch on?
I have mantras, and I mean, it in a way, it applies to what we've been talking about indirectly, that you have to be your own person. So, but the way I put it is, you know, be a first-rate version of yourself rather than a second-rate version of another person or another artist. And that doesn't guarantee that you're going to be a success, but it guarantees. I remember William Tenn told me the hardest thing is to get an identity that's true to you and to stick with it, so that you're not somebody, you know, that you know, nobody needs another John Steinbeck. Nobody needs another William Faulkner, to use the examples that he did. That you have to try to be that author who is unique. So I put it down to be a first, and it just makes sense anyhow in anything you do. Be a first-rate version of yourself and not a second-rate version of another author. And then the corollary of that is, don't chase the market. You will always see its backside. And you know, everybody here, you know, that's what they do. What we do is we're ourselves, and we found a way to express ourselves and to make it so other people hopefully enjoy it. But we all know people who have actually imitated others and have tried to build a career on that level, and they did okay sometimes, but you always know that it's not the real thing, you know. So those are my 2 main things whenever I teach writing. That's what I push.
Joe, I'd actually.
I will say this, that's kind of a version of mine, is write like everybody you know is dead.
Well, that's all right.
You're not writing for, you're just, you're writing for yourself. And then when you get through, you hope other people like it. But if you're sitting there thinking about what your audience is going to like or whatever, then you're going to end up, trying to write to them and end up writing like other people, or writing in a way that's not authentic. I always think that's important. But I told my kids, both of them, I said, pretty much what you said, find your own identity, find your own way. And I always try to, like, if it's like a hockey game and like the puck comes and I kick it back and play with them, but I never really tell them how to do it, because I don't think that's what I want to do.
You can tell them how not to do it. I mean, there's a lot of mistakes.
Sometimes, yeah, you can do that. Sure. But it's probably, not good to write a book that has no character.
Or he'll take it and be like, something's wrong with it. Work it out.
Something's wrong with it. That's what I do.
Thanks for your help, Dad.
There's something wrong with this piece of shit, but
that is valuable feedback.
Yeah, that's so helpful.
Yeah.
David, I actually do want to touch
that's
on
why I didn't become a teacher. Actually, I did teach writing for 8 years. And what I learned is you can't teach writing. You can encourage people that want to write, and you can kind of help somebody get to be a better writer. But I found that even some people who started out having, I guess, all of the abilities to put words together, and then you'd have somebody that wasn't that good, but they were more authentic. And and it is a mystery of words, because sometimes you see this and you go, why doesn't that work? There's not anything really wrong with it, but it just does not have any juice. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I actually want to ask you about one more book, David. Burnt Offerings is one of my favorite. I like the book more than the movie, but both.
No, I don't have anything to do with Burnt Offerings.
I was wondering.
Do that one.
No, I know that. I was wondering if you liked it.
Oh, the book or the movie?
No. Either one.
It's been years since I remember the novel, and it's not specific enough. I thought the novel was pretty good. I don't remember anything about the movie. I did a book called Burnt Sienna, and that's what I thought you were.
Yeah,
I didn't know if I could talk now. Brandon,
you've talked about. I hate the book and the movie.
Really,
I don't like the book or the movie. And my friend William F. Nolan wrote the script, and I love Bill, and he did a good script. But I just didn't think there was anything you could do to help that book. But if it spoke to you, well, there's some people have those feelings.
I know, but I'd suck. Whatever, Joe. Brendan, do you have anything before we do?
I do want to throw out one more question about The Successful Novelist. I read that book over the summer, and it was fantastic. We talked about the whole first person thing, and to each their own opinion. But I just finished writing the first draft of the third book in a trilogy, and the whole thing is in first person. And it's because book one was in first person when I didn't know any better. I wrote the book, and people were like, "Oh, you should really write in third person." I was like, "Well, it's too late now." But reading your book kind of inspired me to say, "Okay, let's put some extra thought into why it is that this story is being told, why it's being dictated."
Exactly.
And I ended up, coming up with what I think is a really neat idea for that kind of gets very clear in book 3, but really resonates throughout the first 2. And I do think that the trilogy as a whole is stronger for that idea, resonating backwards in book 3.
You started by saying in the first 2 books it was in first person, but in the third book I've decided to do different right at the beginning, right? And then, like David was doing for his sequel.
We were talking about Frank Sinatra earlier, and Frank had a sign outside his Palm Springs house at the gate, and it said, "You better have a damn good reason for ringing this bell." And I think that because first person, it's so beautiful, but it's so often not used correctly. So I always figure if you're going to use first person, you better have a damn good reason for it. And if you think about it, then it makes the technique deeper and more authentic. So what you said is very encouraging.
I just downloaded.
And one reason I work in first person most of the time is that I think I do it reasonably well, for one. But secondly, I think is that I care about style a lot, but I'm very much a storyteller. And I think there's kind of a storyteller, and then there's, a writer, and you can be a great writer, but not to be a natural storyteller. And you can be something of a storyteller and not a great writer. But I always felt like that when I tell you what started with me was John Carter of Mars. And when I read that book, I believed it. Back when I read as a kid, I was 10, 11 years old, and I read this. I'm like, my God, this happened to him. And when I read Raymond Chandler, I just said, Marlowe's real. And when I read James Cain, and he was talking about these things these awful, stupid things that these characters were doing, I believed it, but yet I was interested in them. And so for me, I do believe this statement is that first person is the easiest to do, but the hardest to do well. Very good. I think that I have a natural leaning toward it. And a lot of times when I start a novel in third person, I lose interest real quick. And that's not always, but first person for me is the way that I can bring my background, my experiences and things into it. Not necessarily always literal, but I think that I write very much from my own experiences when I was growing up. And, I had some unique things in my background. And I believe that those things help me tell the story better. So I always think, how can I not write it in first person is the first thing, because I'm always, better at that. I think I started a new novel, got about 60 pages in it. And I said, what's wrong with this? And then I realized it was in third person. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean I don't write novels or short stories in third person, because I do, but it's that direct connection that makes a novel strong for me. But I don't think there's a rule. I don't believe a rule.
The idea of doing it but knowing basically what's my motivation, more or less, and then you do it stronger is I like the idea. I think that should be the title of this episode is you can ring my bell, but you better have a good reason.
Better have a damn good reason for ringing this bell.
Yeah. That thing in the acting is sometimes overdone, that what's my motivation, but that's really a kind of thing that I always do is what is the reason that the character would do this? Yeah. And how would this character react? And why would they react that way? And if they're going to react totally different, what is it about them that causes that? And I don't always know in my mind exactly what it is about them, but somewhere in my deep subconscious, I recognize that there's something about this person that causes them to act that way. And then it becomes consistent throughout.
Yeah, there's nothing that'll pull you out faster than when all of a sudden a character who you've established is a certain way, and then all of a sudden they just do something because it's convenient. And actually, funny enough, Dad and I had a conversation this morning about a TV show that we both were really big fans of until it just didn't make sense that the characters were doing something that were like they've established it, but they did it just because it made it something that they could be like, look at that, you didn't see that coming. So.
The worst thing in the world is a writer's room. You get in the writer's room and everybody wants a piece of it. They all want to be sure they're like all the dogs that want to have pissed on that lawn, and they want to show that they have some attachment to it. And it's not about whether it's good, it's about them. Because what they're doing is they're looking for their next job. And they think, if I can say I'm the one that put the dog in there that peed on the car, that was my part. And even if it makes no sense for the novel or for the story, rather. And you see that in film a lot. That's why most film sucks, is that with the best stuff, when they try to adapt something as it existed, do better than when they try to just bring something in and have all these different opinions in a writer's room. I don't love writer's rooms.
It's kind of like what happened with Peter Benchley's Jaws, the book. Great first chapter.
I like that book.
I know.
I like that book, but I think
except for the sex scene in the diner.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't like any of the thing with Hooper in the book, but I like that book. I thought that his descriptions of the shark were just so powerful, and I like the whole impetus of the book. But what happened is when they did the movie, they said, does this part matter? And they threw it out. And Hooper was actually supposed to die in the screenplay too. The only reason they saved him is they had that cage and they couldn't get it to work with him in it. They actually had a little person in there so they could shoot and the shark would look bigger. And the shark nearly got the guy. And so he got out and they had this empty cage. So what they do is they have Hooper crawling across the bottom. One of the coolest things in the film is that he survives. And it was an accident,
I did not know that there's a little person in there. That's an interesting fact.
I saw a thing on Jaws just the other day. All right, guys, I got to go to bed. I'm old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know David needs to go. If I've got to go,
I'm older than you guys, so I'm definitely.
That's a good outro. All right, so
I've got my cot right here, so it's all set. Anyway, great to see everybody. I haven't seen Keith, and I have no idea when. I had a really good dinner with Kasey and Joe at BoucherCon. I think it was in 2019, which I still remember fondly. And it's nice to meet the rest of you guys virtually. And I thank you really deeply for the very kind words for what I do, because as we all know how tough this is. Absolutely. And we do our best, and it's nice to be recognized. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean,
I actually like being on here with David, who's my friend, but he's also kind of one of my writing heroes. So that's cool.
Oh, well, thank you.
That's really cool.
Hey, real quick, David, are you going to go to BoucherCon in San Diego next year?
I just don't know. I got a little phobia with COVID, about airports. Yeah. And I remembered how much I disliked them, but I've been traveling a lot, and I feel luxurious that I haven't been traveling. It's possible. I like BoucherCon a lot, and they were very kind to me with an award. So it might be that I'll get back into it, but at the moment I'm not doing much traveling.
Okay, that's fair. And it's hard. It's like we all got in a different rhythm.
But for you, it'll be easier because you could drive now.
Well, that's my intention. So I hope to see you there.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let me tell David one encouraging thing about traveling. George Martin had a script that I wrote that they made a film out of, and they showed it. Vincent D'Onofrio directed and starred in it. So they said, we want you to come out and we're going to see this. My son went and his girlfriend went, and we all went out there, and I came back with COVID. And
oh, well,
so I was sick 2 days. Yeah, I was sick 2 days, so I was fine, and it was kind of like a light cold because I had all the, the shots, all of the boosters, I wore a mask on the plane, everything, and I still got it, but it was mild. Thank you.
You could have got sicker.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to?
I licked every doorknob. I touched every person. Somehow I didn't get it.
Just real quick, final thoughts. Anybody want to say anything before we go?
Thanks, guys. Thank you for having us.
It was wonderful to see everyone.
This was great.
Good to see everyone.
Good to see you, David, sincerely.
Yeah, same here, believe me.
This is one of my favorite episodes, honestly. And guys, listeners, next episode 169, that'll be our third annual Halloween special with Trevor Henderson. He's a awesome artist. He's an author. We're looking forward to seeing him. Thank you, David, Kasey, Joe, and Keith, and Brennan. Appreciate all you guys. And as always, you have many podcasts to choose from. Thank you for picking us.